In August 1943, Luba Frank, today Mrs. Luba Olenski, jumped from a cattle train packed with men, women and children bound for the Treblinka death camp. Terror, starvation and trauma marked her years during the Shoah. After some 2 years, Luba Olenski joined the resistance movement. She became a partisan. Her autobiography is titled A Life Reclaimed, Child Among the Partisans. I invite Luba to deliver her testimony.
Okay. Good evening, everyone. My name is Luba Olenski. I'm very honored and privileged to be able to stand here in front of you and tell you what happened to me during the Holocaust time. I'm also representing those who were not able, those millions of people that were not here to tell their story. May God save their soul. Well, I was born Luba Frank in the city of Kovno, which was the capital of Lithuania, in 1931. My mother's name was Ita Frank, and my father's name was Alta Frank, and I was Luba Frank. I had 2 younger brothers. One was 9 when he perished, one was 6, and I'm the only one left from the whole family. My father was born in Poland. He smuggled the border before the war, and in order to get into Lithuania, so he could go into the Slabotka Yeshiva. He was there a student for many years, maybe 11 years. He studied day and night, Gemara and Torah. And when he met my mother, he decided to be a supporter of a family and become a breadwinner. My father started hawking and then became a successful businessman, and he opened up a shop from tobacco and cigarettes that supplied for smaller shops. I had a very comfortable and privileged childhood. We had a nanny, my 2 brothers and I, and my mother was helping my father in the business. I knew my father came from Poland, but I knew nothing about the family. When the war broke out in Poland in 1939, we did not have a war in Lithuania. In 1940, the Russians overtook Lithuania, and soon after, they confiscated my father's business. My father had already another business in Vilnius, and he became only a working man in his own business. He didn't want to work Shabbat, so he was only a part-time worker. I still continued with a normal life till 1941. They came to arrest my father, and my father was at Shachrit in the shul for morning prayers, and my mother sent a message to him not to come home, and they let everybody go around free. My father didn't come home. After a few days, he was advised to go back to Poland. Maybe the Russians will forget about him, and he won't have to, and they won't arrest him. So my mother convinced him to take me. I was the weakling of the family. She thought I can't survive a summer without a holiday. It was June, and we arrived in Bialystok. My father had a nephew there. I arrived in Bialystok on the 20th of June. We went for a big walk on Bialystok, and they showed over the Bialystok city, and I was tired. I went to sleep, and the next thing I was woken up by bombs. I started crying, "Daddy, Daddy, what is it?" And he said, "Nothing, my child. It's war, but it won't last long. We'll be able to go back to Mom." That war lasted another 4 years. The next Friday, the Germans walked into Bialystok, and they burned a shul with 2,000 people, children, women, and everybody was shocked, but they stayed on. The following Saturday, it was a Saturday morning when we heard the noise in the corridor. My father's nephew, my cousin, opened the door together with my father, and there was Germans with rifles. Out, Laos. And I started crying, Daddy, don't leave me here with strangers, all by myself. And he said, nothing will happen to you, child. You only want men. That Saturday, they took 5,000 to 6,000 men on the 5th of July, 1941, never to be seen again. The Judenrat told the women, the widows, and the mothers, if they supply them with 5 kilo of gold, they'll release those men. And the women took off their wedding rings and any jewelry and gave it to the Judenrat, but the men were not alive, and they never came back because they were not there. They were not alive. I was left in the care of almost strangers. I never met them before, and they were so good to me. They saved my life. They stood by me. I was 10 years old, and they looked after me the next 2 years in the ghetto. God bless their soul. They should have the real Gan Eden, because otherwise I wouldn't be here to tell you this story. The next announcement came on the 1st of August in Bialystok that all Jews have to go into a special designed place called ghetto. Anybody who was left behind will be shot on the spot. I didn't understand what it was. So my cousin's wife, with whom I was left, she had a brother in the ghetto in that area. So he took her in, and he took me in, and his wife took in her sister, and those people who worked for the Germans were exempted from prosecution. So when it was the uprising, or what they call it, action, they took me in to the factory where they worked for the Germans and hid me under felt. And when there came a commission to check, they couldn't see me, and there's another little boy with me, and we survived. But when I came out of that surrounding, nobody of my girlfriends was alive anymore. I was the only one left to survive the next few months. On the 16th of August, 1943, came the last order that all Jews must come to a certain place outside Bialystok called Petrask. Anybody who will be left behind will be shot on the spot. I remember the women took the children, the ones I lived with, and they gave me a rucksack with food and tins of conserves. And it was a hot day. When I walked and I could not walk anymore, they said, drop a tin. A bit further, they said, throw out another conserve tin. They took pity on me. And when we got to that place, towards evening, we were almost the last people, so we were sitting outside the roundup of those people that were there earlier. All night, women called out, searching for their husbands that got lost in all the crowd. And every time somebody called out a name, the Germans or the Ukrainians came with the butts of the rifles and hit them till they dropped on the ground. The next morning, we were among the first one to be loaded into a train. I didn't realize it's a cattle train. I kept with that family that looked after me, and I stayed by them. And when we were loaded into the train, it was only standing room. I was actually standing with the children, and we sat down on the floor till a brother of the family I lived with, each Pomeranians, stood up and said, brothers and sisters, you should all know, we're not going to a labor camp, we are going to extermination camp. Whoever can save himself should try and jump. Maybe they'll save their lives. This man was actually trying to finalize the opposition, the roundup of the ghetto, the resistance, but he did not, Bialystok did not manage to do it. So that man jumped first. He was a brother of the family I lived with, and he was shot from up the top. The man that I lived with jumped after him. He was a big man, and he was pushed out through the window. And before he jumped, he took off his jacket and gave it to his wife. And I stood there because I wanted to know what happened to him. And they said, oh my God, he hit his head on the post and he never got up. And they told me, little girl, move away. I was 12 by then. Move away, you're taking up space. And I said, out of the blue, how do you know? Maybe I want to jump too. You want to jump? You have to do it now. 2 boys, young men, came over to this man's wife and said, if this girl jumps, we'll look after her. And this wife, whose husband was killed now on the spot, put his jacket on me, knowing what it was in the jacket, all her possessions. And I never understood it till I got much older, what a generous gesture. She had a child on the train. The father jumped, but she didn't leave the child, and she could have done with what was in the jacket. But she gave it to me, and when I jumped, I stood outside on the platform, and somebody hit my hand. Now, you got to do it now. So I jumped, and the bullets were flying between my legs, and then I was unconscious, and an old woman, a Gentile, woke me up, and she said, child, get up. They are clearing up anybody who's alive. They're finishing them off. So and she said, look, here are your Jews by the forest, run. And when I started running, I got to the edge of the forest, and I saw those 2 boys and 2 more men. There's 4 men, and I was the 5th. And we sat at the edge of the forest inside, and they asked me, have you got anything to sell for food, to exchange for food? I said, I don't know, have a look in the jacket. And when they touched it, they said, yes, you have. There was a lot of possessions in the lining of the jacket. They were wealthy people, the ones I lived with. So they said the next morning, when the first train, we'll hear the first train going to Treblinka, we will be able to cross the railway lines, and then it'll be clear. So at sunrise, we had the first transport going to Treblinka, and after that, we crossed the railway lines, and there was not a soul to be seen around, except for one shepherd came out with a stick and started chasing, you bloody Jews, you've got no right to be on this earth. I'm taking you to the Germans. Now, I never understand now how possible 4 men got frightened for one shepherd, and they ran away, and I couldn't keep up with them. I tried to, and you caught me, and I spoke to him in my broken Polish, let me go, I'm a child, I've done nothing wrong. And he said, bloody Jews, you've got no right to be here. So I could see that I'm getting nowhere. Suddenly, I decided I ran out of the jacket. He was holding me for the back, and instead of chasing me, he started looking what's in the jacket. All I wanted is to be with those 4 men, because otherwise I'm the only Jewess in the whole world. And wherever I came to the next village. They said, he was here they were here half an hour ago. We gave them some we told them to get lost. Somebody else told them, gave them a piece of bread, and we don't want them here. I didn't know where I was. I was going from village to village, and everywhere I came, they said they were here last night, they were here a few hours ago. I could not catch up. All I wanted is to be not to be the only Jew in the world, but I couldn't get hold of them. And on the third day, they told me they were caught last night and taken to the Germans. So then I was the only person, the only Jewish person in the world that was alive. I didn't realize that there are other Jews. And I didn't realize how to protect myself. I believed in women, in people's goodness, and I couldn't believe that people were so bad. The young men always chased me, and they said, we can get a kilo of sugar for her, and the old women said, leave her alone. It was potato digging time in Poland, so I was walking around the fields. The women left me what they had took for them, for the food, and your leftovers. And one night they told me to go into the haystack. It'll be warmer because I didn't have the jacket anymore. I went into the haystack, and early morning I heard this terrible noise of an animal. I thought wolves came to eat me. When I ran out of the haystack, it was a cow, which I did not know, being a city girl. I was walking around from village to village. Nobody ever took me in. Only once did a woman at the end of the village say, come in, child. You can come into the barn, and I'll put you up on the roof. And when I come to feed the pigs, I'll bring you some food. I was there 2 or 3 days. I was lying in the top and looking at the world among the openings of the roof, the spaces, and I was eating poppy seed from the flowers. And she brought me from time to time food. And then one day, on the third or fourth day, she said, oh, you must go because everybody heard about you. The Germans are searching every house. And I begged her to let me stay. And she said, no, but I want your clothes. I've got a girl of the same age as you. They took my clothes. She took my clothes, gave me schmattes, and she gave me a pair of shoes on heels, which I never wore heels in my life. So I carried them on my shoulder. And then I started to walk, and then it was harvest time, and it was prickly, and my feet got infected, and there was not a Jew in the world, and I didn't know how I can exist. I was like that 5.5, 6 weeks all on my own, spending the nights at the edge of the forest, scared to go inside the forest. And then, after 5.5 weeks or 6 weeks, I went into a house, on the last house in the village, and the woman said, come in, child, I'll give you hot soup. She was breastfeeding a baby, and 3 young men came in and said, you keep the Jewess here, we are going to bring the eldest of the village, and we're taking her to the Germans. And she started crossing herself, saying, now you look what you've done. They're going to kill me and my child. Get out, run. And I ran, and they were chasing me, and finally they gave up chasing me, and I reached the forest. And that night I made a decision, I'm going to give myself up. Anything would be better than this. If I'm lucky, they'll send me to a camp with the other Jewish people, as long as I'm not the only Jew in the world. In the morning, when I heard the bells ring, I knew it was a Sunday. I was going downhill to give myself up to the village, when an old man met me, and he said, you know, child, you must be the girl everybody heard about you. You know, there are Jews in the forest. I didn't realize, couldn't grasp what he was telling me. It's not possible. So I thought, he's just pulling my leg. I kept walking, and another man going to church said, "You are the girl, everybody heard about you. You know, I know in the forest there are Jews, the sons of Janko, calling them in Polish Jankeluki, and they said, if you come at nightfall at the edge of the well, they'll come and collect you." I said, I have got nothing to lose, so I went to the well and waited all day in the shrubs. And when I heard speaking Yiddish, it sounded to me like German, and I said, that's it, the end of me. But when I saw those people, they were Jewish people, and they were so happy to see me. They're all from the same place that my Dufce comes. They were Bryanska Jews, and they are the most wonderful people in the world. I was always lucky. I met good people. They took me to their camp where the fire was going and there's food being cooked, and they fed me. And they said, the Kaiser, which is the king, went to get food for all of us, and I didn't realize what they are talking about. By that time, I had a stick to protect myself from the dogs. And I fell asleep by the fire, and then I was woken up, and they said, the Kaiser is here. It's a joke. They always reminded me of the joke. I stood up with a stick, and it was Dufce, and I didn't know him, that years later he will become my husband. At that time, he just looked at me, touched my ribs, and he said, she'll leave. But I have to get her some clothes from a farmer that has a girl of the same age. And he was the main one that supplied food for nearly 80 people, 78 people from Bryansk, from the city of Bryansk. From that day on, I didn't care what happens to me, what happens with the rest of them. The same fate can be mine as long as I was with other people, with other Jewish people. After that, after a short time, they joined the partisans, and we were and the partisans and the Jews were lived for a while together. Then they formed a partisan group in the name of Zhukov, and the orders came from Moscow, and they asked Luba Goldberg, that was here lighting a candle tonight, to come and be a cook for them. And she said she'll only come if they allow her to take me as a chaperone and to help her. So I left the family group, and I went with the fighting group, and we made 30 kilometers in one night. And I didn't tell you about the fact that we were all in bunkers beforehand. They dug, as the days got colder, we all dug. They dug bunkers, one apart from the other, about 6 kilometers sometimes. And one day they heard about a bunker that was being destroyed by grenade. And there are six Jews dead. And David Dufce said, I've got to go and see if we can bury the bodies or say Kaddish for them. And everybody begged him, don't go. You'll bring footmarks. It was snowing. And he took 2 other men, and they walked deep in snow until they got to the other bunker. And when they got near the opening of the bunker, it was a stench of dead bodies. And suddenly they heard a voice of a woman crying, and one of them got inside the bunker, and there was a wounded woman, and they pulled her out, and the 3 men carried her to a village. The Dufce knew the man. He said, I'll reward you if you manage to get her healed and well, even if it means calling a doctor. You'll be well rewarded. And that young woman survived, and she married one of the men that rescued her. And then as I said, I went with Luba Goldberg and the group of partisans and Jewish men as well as Russians, 30 kilometers, and they had the task of a sabotage to destroy 3 bridges. Those orders came from Moscow, from the leader of the partisans. Our camp was called Zhukov, under the name of Zhukov, and they destroyed camps. They destroyed those bridges and came back in one piece, and they kept doing anything to make it hard for the Germans to succeed. I was with them till the end of the war, and then we joined again the original group of members of the family, the women and children, where we started from, and it was all around the forest of Bryansk. And when the war, and then one day in 1944, I was with them a year, and in 1944 we had a horse hoofs in the forest, and we had a suspicion that somebody came to rescue us. As it happens, when the women went out and saw a Russian soldier dressed in the Russian uniform, and he happened to be Jewish, and he said, stay another couple of days, don't go back to Bryansk, it's still not clear, it's still dangerous. And I was lucky, they took me with them wherever they went. I wanted to go in search, to go back to Lithuania to search for my mother. Little did I know, which I heard afterwards, that they pulled out my younger brother from my arms and threw him on a truck of children. He was 6 years old, and they destroyed him. The next one was my 9-year-old brother, and my mother was sent to Stutthof in 1944. I just found out 2 years ago. And we were almost liberated. I know she arrived on the 16th of July, but nobody knows what happened to her at the end. And I was lucky that people took a liking to me, and I'm here to tell this story. So many others couldn't tell the story, and I have to, because of the heroism of the partisans and the Jewish men around my area, around Bryansk, that saved many lives, and a lot of people survived because of them. And this is my story, and God rewarded me by giving me 3 children, and now they're married, and I've got 2 daughters-in-law and a son-in-law, with 7 grandchildren and 4, nearly 5 great-grandchildren. So from one little girl, I've got a family, which I adore, and I'm very happy for it. Thank you for listening to me, and I wish everybody not to hear any more bad news. Thank you.